Hands where we can see them now, shouted the agent through the loudspeaker, guns aimed straight at the small fishing boat. Sarah slowly raised her weathered hands, her expression calm, eyes locked on the nervous officers jumping onto her vessel, trampling over her fishing gear. "Is there a problem, officers?" she asked softly. "Search everything," ordered the team leader. Sarah stood still, feeling their suspicious stares as they tore through her belongings. What none of them could have guessed was that within minutes, they'd discover they weren't dealing with just any fisherman. They were face to face with a legend the military had been searching for. Every morning, Sarah Mitchell walks down to the small dock near her home on the Maine coast, a simple wooden structure painted white, though it used to be blue 2 decades ago. At 52, she follows a routine she chose for herself after leaving a life most people could never imagine. As she sips her coffee, she checks over her fishing gear, then starts up the engine of her boat, a well-kept 1995 Boston whaler with the name Liberty painted on the side in faded blue letters, to the neighbors in Seabrook Harbor. Sarah is just a quiet fisherwoman, polite but reserved. She doesn't own a smartphone, keeps no social media accounts, and rarely speaks about her past. She's lived alone ever since she moved here 8 years ago. Her only companions the seagulls that recognize her from afar and the striped bass that dance around her lines. The townspeople respect her privacy. There's something in her bearing that suggests she's earned her solitude. What Sarah truly finds peace in is fishing, almost always in the same spot where the water is just the right color to calm her soul, where for a few hours she can forget the weight of the memories she carries. It's also where the fish never fail to show up, as if they too understand the need for routine, for the familiar rhythm of cast and wait, cast and wait. That particular morning, Sarah was just about to land a beautiful striped bass, one of the biggest she'd seen all season. The fish was putting up a good fight, her rod bent in a perfect arc, when out of nowhere a Coast Guard cutter pulled up so close that her small boat rocked hard from the wake. "Hands where we can see them now," shouted Agent Martinez through the loudspeaker, his voice cutting through the morning calm like a blade. Sarah slowly raised her calloused hands, her expression unchanged, eyes fixed on the 3 heavily armed agents who leaped aboard her vessel with military precision. All she could think about was the striped bass that had just gotten away, and how these young men had no idea what they'd just walked into. "Is there a problem, officers?" she asked gently, her voice carrying a calmness that seemed to unsettle the agents more than resistance would have. "Search everything," ordered Agent in Charge Robert Chun, a 15-year veteran of maritime enforcement who'd never encountered a situation quite like this. Something about the woman's composure bothered him. In his experience, innocent people got nervous during searches. They asked questions, demanded explanations, sometimes even got angry. This woman did none of that. She simply watched with the patience of someone who had been through far worse. Sarah stood motionless as they tore through every inch of her boat. Agent Williams, the youngest of the 3, knocked over a tackle box, scattering lures and sinkers across the deck. Agent Thompson shoved her coffee thermos aside, the metal container rolling and hitting the gunwale with a hollow clang. Her fishing rod was carelessly tossed to one side, and the small framed photograph of her late partner that sat on the console fell face down onto the damp deck. "Papers," Chin demanded curtly. Sarah slowly pointed to a small compartment near the helm. Williams yanked it open, spilling out nautical charts and a waterproof wallet containing the boat's registration and her fishing license. Chin examined the documents with the scrutiny of a man looking for any excuse to make an arrest. "Sarah Elizabeth Mitchell," he read aloud, then looked up suspiciously. "What exactly are you doing out here, Ms. Mitchell?" "Fishing," she replied simply. Williams laughed, the sound harsh against the gentle lapping of waves. "Fishing, right? A boat like this is perfect for smuggling operations." Thompson continued his aggressive search, checking compartments, lifting seats, inspecting every inch of the vessel with increasing frustration. Sarah remained standing in the center of the chaos, watching her few possessions get scattered and disrespected. Her expression didn't show anger or frustration, only that same deep, quiet patience, as if she had seen far worse treatment and knew that truth always finds its way to the surface, eventually. "We received credible intelligence," Chin said, leaning close to Sarah's face. "Drug trafficking. Precise coordinates, specific timing, exact vessel description. Strange coincidence. You being right here, right now." His voice carried barely concealed hostility. In his mind, her calmness was suspicious. Every smuggler he'd ever caught had started out acting innocent, but they all broke eventually. "I fish here every morning," Sarah replied quietly. "Same time, same spot for the past 8 years." But Chin wasn't satisfied. "Keep searching," he ordered his team. Small packages of narcotics could be hidden anywhere. As the agents intensified their search, Sarah's eyes wandered to a photograph of her partner lying face down on the wet deck. Maria had been everything to her: friend, lover, fellow warrior, and the only person who truly understood the weight they both carried from their years in uniform. Maria's death from cancer 3 years ago had been the final push that drove Sarah to this isolated coastline, seeking the kind of peace that only comes from solitude and the endless rhythm of the sea. "All clear, Chief," Williams finally reported, his voice tinged with disappointment and growing confusion. But Chin wasn't ready to give up. In his 15 years of maritime law enforcement, he developed a sixth sense about these situations. Something felt wrong, but he couldn't put his finger on what it was. "Let's run our ID again," Chin said, grabbing his radio. "Control, this is Operation Seahawk. I need a comprehensive background check on Sarah Elizabeth Mitchell, age 52. Check for priors, aliases, any red flags." The radio crackled as the request was processed. While they waited, Sarah kept her gaze fixed on the horizon, where a small fleet of lobster boats was beginning their morning work. The familiar sight brought her a measure of calm. These waters had become her sanctuary, the one place where she could simply be Sarah the fisherman, not the person she used to be. The response came faster than expected, and when it did, the voice of their base commander cut through the morning air like a lightning bolt. Agent Chun stepped back from Ms. Mitchell immediately and rendered appropriate honors. Chun frowned, pressing the radio closer to his ear. "Control, repeat that last transmission. You have boarded the vessel of Colonel Sarah Mitchell, United States Marine Corps, retired, recipient of the Navy Cross, Silver Star, and Purple Heart with 2 oak leaf clusters for extraordinary heroism during classified operations in Afghanistan and Iraq." The radio fell silent for several long seconds. Chun felt the blood drain from his face as he looked at Sarah with completely new eyes. Williams and Thompson had stopped their search entirely, both staring at the woman they'd been treating like a common criminal. The voice from control continued, now with barely contained urgency. "Furthermore, Agent Chun, we've just been informed that Maritime Task Force Beta intercepted the actual target vessel 20 minutes ago. Your coordinates were incorrect. The boat carrying the narcotics has been seized, and 3 suspects are in custody." Chun felt his stomach drop through the deck. Not only had they humiliated a decorated war hero, but they'd been at the wrong coordinates entirely. A simple navigation error that had led them to board an innocent woman. And not just any woman, but someone whose service record was probably classified at levels he'd never see. "Colonel Mitchell," Chin said, his voice now respectful, almost whispered. "Ma'am, we had no idea. This is a serious operational error." Sarah looked at him without speaking for a long moment. There was no anger in her eyes, no desire for retribution, only that same deep stillness that seemed to make the 3 agents even more uncomfortable. She had faced enemy fire, survived ambushes, lost friends in combat, and endured interrogations by people who wanted to break her spirit. This morning's humiliation was just another wave in an ocean she'd been navigating for years. "May I have my papers back, Agent Chen?" she asked simply. Chen handed her the documents with shaking hands, then turned to his team. "Secure everything. Put it all back exactly as it was." As the agents hurriedly tried to restore her belongings to order, Sarah calmly reorganized her fishing gear, checking her rod to make sure it hadn't been damaged. She picked up Maria's photograph and gently wiped the salt spray from the glass before returning it to its place on the console. "Colonel," William said hesitantly, his earlier cockiness completely gone. "Ma'am, thank you for your service." Sarah nodded slightly, acknowledging the sentiment without making the young man feel worse than he already did. She understood that these agents were just doing their jobs, following orders, trying to keep the coastline safe. The fact that they'd made a mistake didn't erase their dedication to duty. Within minutes, the Coast Guard cutter had pulled away, leaving Sarah alone on her boat once more. The morning sun was climbing higher, painting the water in shades of gold and blue. She started her engine and headed back to her usual fishing spot, hoping the striped bass might still be running. But the peace of the morning had been shattered. As she cast her line, Sarah found herself thinking not about fish, but about the life she left behind. The missions in Helmand Province, where her unit had held a strategic position against overwhelming odds. The night raids in Fallujah, where her leadership had saved civilian lives. The classified operations she could never discuss, not even with Maria during their quiet moments together. The next morning, a government sedan pulled up at the dock behind Sarah's modest cottage. Agent Chen stepped out alone, no longer wearing his tactical gear, but dressed in civilian clothes. Sarah was prepping her boat for another day of fishing when she noticed him approaching. "Colonel Mitchell, may I have a word with you?" he asked respectfully. Sarah continued checking her gear, but nodded for him to continue. "Yesterday was inexcusable," Chen began, his voice heavy with genuine remorse. "You know, my father served in the Corps. Staff Sergeant Miguel Chun, 2nd Battalion, 8th Marines. Did 3 tours in Iraq." Sarah paused in her work, looking up at him with interest. "He made me promise, even as a kid, that if I ever had a chance to serve my country, I'd do it with honor. Yesterday, when my team boarded your boat and treated you the way we did." Chen's voice trailed off. "If he were alive today, he wouldn't recognize the man I've become. I think I forgot what really matters." Sarah set down the rope she'd been coiling and studied the young agent. She saw something in his eyes that reminded her of her own Marines. That particular mixture of pride, dedication, and the dawning recognition that good intentions weren't always enough. "It was an operational error," she said simply. "Mistakes happen in law enforcement, just like they do in combat. What matters isn't the mistake. It's how we respond to it." The simplicity and grace of her response hit Chun like a physical blow. Here was a woman who'd endured humiliation at the hands of his team, and instead of filing complaints or demanding heads roll, she was offering understanding. "I don't know many people who could forgive something like that so easily," Chin said quietly. "Anger is a heavy load to carry," Sarah replied, returning to her preparation work. "I've carried too much weight in my life. Now I choose to carry only what's necessary." Chun watched as she efficiently prepared her boat for another day on the water. Her movements were precise, economical, the product of decades of military discipline applied to civilian life. "Colonel, would you mind if I joined you today? I've got some time off, and I've never actually been fishing." Sarah looked at him for a moment, weighing his request. She saw genuine remorse in his expression, and something else, a young man trying to understand how to be better. "Hop in," she said finally. "I've got a spare rod. Just remember, you owe me a striped bass." As they headed out into the morning waters, Chin found himself watching how Sarah handled the boat. Her movements were precise, efficient, showing a deep understanding of wind and current that could only come from years of experience. "How long have you been fishing these waters?" Chin asked as they reached her usual spot. 8 years, Sarah replied, dropping anchor with practiced ease. She handed him an old but well-maintained fishing rod. "My partner used to fish with this one." Chun took the rod with appropriate reverence, sensing the weight of memory behind her words. Sarah showed him how to prepare the line, tie the hook, and select the right bait for the conditions. They cast their lines simultaneously, the morning sun warming their faces as gulls wheeled overhead. For the first hour, they fished in comfortable silence. Chin found himself relaxing in a way he hadn't in months. There was something about the rhythm of the water, the simplicity of waiting for a fish to bite, that seemed to strip away all the complications of modern life. Finally, Chin felt a tug on his line. He started to yank back, but Sarah's calm voice stopped him. "Easy," she instructed. "Let it run a bit, then pull steady and slow." Following her guidance, Chin successfully brought in a small striped bass. He held up proudly, but Sarah shook her head. "Let it go," she suggested. "Too young. Needs time to grow." Chin looked disappointed but followed her advice, gently releasing the fish back into the clear water. "That fish is like us," Sarah observed as they watched it disappear into the depths. We all need time to grow into who we're meant to be. As the morning progressed, they caught several more fish, most of which Sarah insisted they release. Chun began to understand that for her, fishing wasn't about the catch. It was about the process, the patience, the connection to something larger than herself. Colonel, Chin said during one of their quiet moments, can I ask you something personal? Sarah nodded. Do you ever miss it? The core of the missions, being part of something bigger? Sarah was quiet for a long moment, watching a lobster boat work its traps in the distance. Every day, she admitted, but I learned something during my last deployment. Sometimes the most important mission is knowing when to step back, when to let others carry the load. She paused, her eyes distant with memory. I lost too many good Marines because I thought I could save everyone. It took me years to understand that leadership sometimes means knowing when to stop leading. Chin absorbed this wisdom in silence. Around them, the morning continued its peaceful progression. Gulls calling, waves lapping against the hull, the distant sound of other boats going about their business. Why did you stay here? Chin asked. Why this place? Because here, I'm just Sarah the fisherman, she replied. Not Colonel Mitchell, not a hero, not a symbol of anything. Just a woman trying to find peace in simple things. As they prepared to head back to shore, neither had caught anything worth keeping. But both men knew they hadn't come out here just for fish. Chin had learned something about grace under pressure, about forgiveness, about the difference between authority and leadership. Sarah, for her part, had been reminded that sometimes the best way to serve is to teach, not through lectures or manuals, but through example, through showing others what quiet dignity looks like in action. As they tied up at the dock, Chin turned to her one final time. Colonel, thank you for today, for yesterday, for everything you've done that I'll never know about. Sarah nodded slightly, the ghost of a smile crossing her weathered face. Just remember what you learned out there today. Agent Chun. Pass it on when you get the chance. As Chin drove away, Sarah stood on her dock, watching the afternoon light play across the water. Tomorrow she would be back out there, casting her lines, seeking that perfect balance between patience and hope that fishing teaches so well. The sea held all secrets, all stories, all the way to what had been and what could still be. And for now, that was enough.